Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming today. My name is Rick Bishop, and I'm the Executive Director of the Friends of Bass River. I joined the organization in January 2020. The original organization was established in 2017. But I think we have a lot of very exciting things to share with you today. I think we'll be able to share parts of Bass River that I bet very few of you are familiar with, which I'm excited about because it's one of the key spots for some of our major projects for the coming year. But first, I'd like to open it up with a 3-minute video that talks about the upper Bass River headwaters that I think you'll find very informative. So we can get it going. This all worked fine about an hour ago.
It worked once.
There we go. Can you make it full screen? Yep.
When asked, most people believe Bass River begins at the mouth, at Nantucket Sound, and ends at Fallons Pond. As we exited the water in Fallons Pond, we are flying west towards the true beginning of Bass River. This area, known as Crab Creek, leading to Mill Pond, is the true beginning of our river. Unfortunately, Mill Pond today is quite ill, suffering from high levels of nitrogen and dissolved oxygen that result in yearly thick algae blooms and few fish. One reason for this is restricted water flow. Crab Creek, leading up to the North Dennis Road culvert, is 58 feet wide, and the culvert is only 6 feet square. Because of this constriction, the volume of water necessary to flush Mill Pond never gets there. What water does get through gains significant velocity that results in erosion and undercutting of the banks, further silting in the area. The Mill Pond area is historically significant to the town of Yarmouth. In 1755, the area once known as Weir Village featured over 25 homes and a school, with fishing and farming being the basis of their livelihood. Before the man-made earthen dikes shown below were built, this area boasted of the second largest annual herring catch in the state. In the early 1900s, cranberry farming along the shores of Mill Pond resulted in major changes. Below, the remnants of the freshwater Hamlin's Brook can be seen leading to Miss Thatcher's Pond, the natural spawning habitat for herring. If you know where to look, you can find a fish ladder waiting for their return.
It's often fun for me to ask people where Bass River ends, and they typically say Fallon's Pond. So it's nice and instructive to see that the river does indeed continue well beyond that. So looking at our project last year, we concluded very, very clearly that there certainly was no shortage of anecdotal information on the water quality for the river. But we determined it had been over 20 years since there had been a comprehensive study of our river, that we thought that we would begin a water testing program to quantify exactly the health of our water. And we've been blessed with 12 volunteers that have really been dedicated to doing our water quality. Every week from June to September, they're on the river with their tools, gathering samples of our water, and doing some chemical analysis, and preparing our samples to be used by our wonderful partners, the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown. Dr. Amy Costa and Jen Burkhart have been just tremendous helping us with our water testing. And Amy's going to come up now and talk to us about the quality of our water and where we've been and where we're hopefully going. She's been a tremendous resource for us. You can do it from there, yeah, sure. Yeah, while you're getting ready. While Amy's getting ready, this map of our river shows very clearly our testing sites: Mill Pond, Fallon's Pond, Kelly's Bay, Grand Cove, Aunt Julia's, and Uncle Freeman's, the Bass River Yacht Club. And that's where you can find our water testing team on a weekly basis. It's interesting. Mill Pond is so ill, it was mentioned in the video, that the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries has designated it as a prohibited area for shellfishing and fin fishing. So that's what we're challenged for. We're looking at a need for a 73% reduction in nitrogen in Mill Pond and about a 46% reduction for the remainder of the river. So there's a lot of work to be done.
So I'm going to stand over here so I can drive the computer, but you don't have to look at me. You can stay focused on the screen. Again, I'm Amy Costa. I direct the Water Quality Monitoring Program at the Center for Coastal Studies. Work very closely with Jenny Burkhart and others.
Can you put it a little closer?
Sorry, is this better?
Yes.
Okay. So today I'm just going to give you a little bit of background information about the Center for Coastal Studies and our water quality monitoring program, and then I'll tie in the data, the water quality data we've been analyzing for Bass River. So, how do you, ma'am? Okay. So the Center for Coastal Studies, we're a nonprofit organization founded in 1976. Our mission is to understand, preserve, and protect marine ecosystems and the coastal environment through applied research, education, and public policy. We are involved in a lot of different research activities. We're most well known for our research on whales, primarily humpback whales and right whales. But we do have a very active coastal geology program, which looks at erosion, sediment transfer. Another part of it is seafloor mapping. We have a seal research program that looks at seals' diet and habitat use. We have a coastal debris program that collects, cleans up coastal debris from both beaches and offshore, any abandoned ghost gear. We also have a fisheries program that works with local fishermen, and the newest part of that program is actually acoustic monitoring of great white sharks. But the program that I'm going to talk about today is our water quality monitoring program. A little bit of history. We started monitoring back in 2000. The The impetus behind starting this program was when the Boston outfall pipe went online. It was scheduled to go online in 2001, so we wanted to start monitoring water quality before that. And what this pipe did, it diverted, I'm sure you probably are all very aware of it, but it diverted sewage from Boston Harbor 9.5 miles offshore. And there was a lot of concern about the potential impacts on Cape Cod waters just because of the circulation patterns for the Gulf of Maine and Massachusetts Bay. So we started monitoring water quality in Cape Cod Bay and Stellwagen Bank, and we are still working with Massachusetts Water Resource Authority to this day to monitor sites to track potential impacts of the Boston outfall. In 2006, we expanded our program to not only look at offshore influences on Cape Cod, but also what Cape Cod itself was having on its nearshore waters. So we started monitoring all the different harbors, estuaries, creeks, all these locations that drained into Cape Cod Bay. And then in 2014, we expanded again to the Nantucket Sound side, and that's where you guys are probably more interested in. We monitor several stations offshore Nantucket Sound, and we also monitor all the different embayments and creeks and harbors and estuaries that drain into the Sound. So to date, we work with a number of different environmental organizations, including Friends of Bass River and others, as well as citizen scientists, to collect data at over 100 stations all over Nantucket Sound, Cape Cod Bay, and Cape Cod itself. So this map is taken directly off our water quality monitoring data website, and you'll see the website address. So what you can do is we collect, on the right of the slide, you see all the different data that we collect at each of the stations. So we collect temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and then we collect a water sample that's brought back to our lab for analysis for nutrients, plant pigments, and turbidity. So if you go to this website, you can click on any of the stations that you're interested in, and you'll see the data in graphical form for these locations. So this is as an example. And in the top figures, what you see is where the current year's data, so for right now, we only have data up through 2020. We haven't analyzed completely all of our 2021 data. So you'll see where the current year's data falls in reference to all of the historical data. So 2020 compared to the 15 years prior to that. And then in the bottom, down here, you can select any of the 17 parameters that we analyze, look at them graphically at any duration over time that you're interested in. And then you can also download the data in numerical form if you want to play with it yourself. So this is a very good resource. A lot of people, both from just public interest to academics and research, that have utilized this website, and I hope you can find it useful as well. We do have Bass River data on this website as well. So while we were establishing our water quality monitoring program at the Center for Coastal Studies, the Massachusetts Estuaries Project, or MEP, and I'm sure you've all heard of that as well, was becoming established about the same time. They were created in 2001. What they are is they're a collaboration between the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, so Mass DEP, the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, and all the towns on Cape Cod. And over the past 20 years, they have analyzed a number of estuaries in southern Massachusetts for the amount of nitrogen loading that's specific to each estuary. And then using this data, they've looked at the amount of nitrogen or the types of reductions in nitrogen that need to be made to maintain a healthy ecosystem. One thing that's come out of this project is the establishment of total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, for nitrogen. And basically what that is the amount of nitrogen that an estuary can assimilate and remain healthy. So the map that you see shows all the different estuaries that are being studied by MEP. It's color-coded based on what has been completed, Bass River's been completed, and what is still being analyzed. So basically what they do, they collect 3 years of data, they feed it into this model, and from the model, it outputs a number of suggestions of the amount of nitrogen that needs to be reduced for each estuary. So data were collected for Bass River. This is a map of Bass River, and all the dots are the locations. They had 13 different stations in Bass River. Data were collected between 2003 and 2005, and a report was put out in 2011, and it's accessible online. It gives a lot of information. And then the report later was updated with additional data between 2006 and 2008 and put out again in 2017, I believe. But what the project showed was that Bass River system is impaired. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody. It was impaired because it has nutrient levels that are too high, dissolved oxygen levels that are too low, chlorophyll levels that are too high, and very degraded eelgrass and benthic habitat. So one of the outcomes of this project was they determined the location of what they call a sentinel station, and it's thought that if water quality standards are met at this sentinel station by reducing nitrogen concentrations or reducing nitrogen loading, then the water quality standards for the entire system should be met. So the station identified for Bass River was BR7, which is right in the middle of the river. That's the station that the Center for Coastal Studies has been monitoring. And the threshold that they determined was 0.42 milligrams per liter. So supposedly, if total nitrogen levels are at or below that station, then nitrogen loading has been reduced enough to the estuary that the system should be healthy. It was also recommended that even after this, the 3 years and the report was completed, that the areas continue to be monitoring, what they term compliance monitoring. So a reduced level, they realize that the towns can't maintain the intensity of sampling at 13 stations that they did for their project, but they still want data coming in to indicate if the water quality standards are being met and if there's any changes. So what they suggested was about half, 6 to 7 stations. At a bare minimum, they wanted the Sentinel station monitored. So that's when the Center for Coastal Studies came in. In 2014, we were requested by the county to monitor all of the Sentinel stations throughout Cape Cod that had been established by the Massachusetts Estuaries Project. So we started doing that. Again, Bass River, BR7, their Sentinel station is BR7. And this shows the total nitrogen data measured at BR7 for the past 7 years, so 2014 through 2020. And that I'm only going to concentrate on TN data. Just because that's the focus of MEP and a lot of other projects, it's not necessarily, in my opinion, the most informational parameter for water quality, but it's what a lot of stuff is being based on. So that's what we'll focus on today. So anyway, these are the data for BR, for total nitrogen, BR7. And this line just shows the trend. And there's a very, very, very slight upward trend in total nitrogen over the past 7 years. But it's so slight that it's not significant. So basically, there's been no change in total nitrogen, either up or down, for the past 7 years. If you compare that to data from 2003, from the MEP project, the early 2000s, again, you'll see a very, very slight upward trend, but it's not significant. So basically, there has not been that much change in total nitrogen levels in the past 20 or so years. If you look at the threshold that was established by the MEP project, which is 0.42 milligrams per liter, or it converts to 30 micromolar, which is what this figure is, you'll see that the majority. So you'll see that the majority of years, total nitrogen was well above the threshold level. So again, the water quality standards for Bass River are not being met. TN remains well above the threshold that was established by MEP. So as I said earlier, that the compliance monitoring, the bare minimum was monitoring the Sentinel station, but they would really like for more stations to be monitored within the system, and that's where Rick and the Friends of Bass River came to our rescue, and it started in 2020, started monitoring 5 additional stations, and again, they added a 6th one in 2021. So we now have a really good picture of what's going on in Bass River. This is where it falls on our map. And these are if you click on any of those stations, the data will come up. We monitor the same parameters at these stations that we do at all of our other stations. And just a brief look at what their 2020 data look like. We're still in the process of analyzing the 2021 data. From the 2021, what I've looked at so far is not that different from 2020, maybe slightly improved, but that's probably more because of the drought than of anything else. But what you'll see in these figures, moving from the head, which is Mill Pond, towards the mouth, and I included a Nantucket station that is about a couple miles offshore of Bass River, just to give you an idea of what baseline conditions look like offshore. So moving from the head to the mouth, you'll see the top figures in blue is salinity. You'll see what you would expect, that salinity levels are lower towards the head and increase towards the mouth. The other figures, turbidity, plant pigments, dissolved inorganic nitrogen, and total nitrogen, you'll see highest turbidity levels, highest chlorophyll, highest nutrients towards the head, the most impaired. So the most impaired areas of the river are towards the head, and then water quality improves as you move towards the mouth. And that's likely because, these stations upshore are more influenced by septic systems and less influenced by flushing. And I think both of those topics are going to be addressed in upcoming presentations. So I'll leave it at that. I did want to acknowledge the following Center for Coastal Studies staff, Jenny Burkhart, who I've mentioned before. She, among all her other responsibilities with the monitoring program, she worked very closely with the Friends of Bass River. Our funding was from Mass DEP in Barnstable County, and also a very big thank you to all the different collaborating organizations and our very dedicated core of citizen scientists that have helped us collect data and samples at all of our stations. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Amy, very much. Didn't mention that we're lucky enough to have 2 DY high school interns working with us this past year, and Dan Rogers from Stonehill College is about to come up and talk about some additional work he did with his students from Stonehill that were specific to the Kelly's Bay, Fallons Pond, Indian Lands area that was kind of new for us, which is great. Dan, do you want to handle it the same way? You want to run your own computer?
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dan Rogers. If you don't know where Stonehill College is, we're up in Easton, so sort of north and a little bit west of Brockton. We're a small college. We have about 2,500 undergrads, no graduate program. So it's a little bit different than sort of the big state colleges that are my history. What we do that I think is really special at Stonehill is because we don't have graduate programs, the students in my lab are all undergraduates. So all of our chemistry, I'm in the chemistry department, all of our chemistry majors spend time in our research labs, and so they get real practical hands-on experience doing real science. It's not just doing this pre-made classroom lab that works every single time, right? This is real science where you have to go out and collect the water, figure out what to do with it. Science doesn't always work the first time. In fact, if you're doing science properly, it almost never works. That's when you're actually learning something. So what my lab is really interested in is looking at how nutrients move through an ecosystem and how they're removed from the ecosystem. So being a chemist, I look at ecologies a little bit differently than a biologist would. A biologist will sit there and tell you what animals are doing what. I look at rates of processes. I don't really care who's doing what. I just want to know how fast it's getting done, right? The analogy I always use is if I have a plumbing leak at my house, I really don't care which plumber I get. I just want to make sure he's doing his job, right? And so that's sort of my view. I'm looking up a little bit higher than a biologist would. And so we're going to go through some of that in a few moments.
May I use your microphone 1 second? If we could ask whoever owns a deep red Subaru, 1AXC56, it's parked over there. If they could just move it to the back of the lot, it would be great. It's kind of blocking a number of people. Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Yep. You get to see it all backwards. All right. So I stole the title from the Friends of Bass River website because they're smarter than I am. But what we are really trying to do is trying to educate you all, general public, our colleagues. We collaborate all the time. That's the process of science. And we're going to try and preserve what we have, restore what we can. The people who really do the work are the four ladies listed after my name. So Abby is the woman on the left. Kendall is the woman on the right. They were supported by some funds that some members from Bass River donated for us to get an internship started. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And in my lab as well this summer, I promise I won't hit you, was Emily and Maddie, and I'll point them out when they come in pictures as well. But basically, this is all first experience in research kind of things going on. And so I'm going to show you how we do all of this. That's right. Okay. Yeah, if I just say slide, just go forward. Thanks. All right, so I'm going to move up here. So what do you think of when you start to think of the coastal waters? Why do you live on Cape Cod? I'm a professor, so you can talk to me. Okay? Or you can stare at me blankly. I'm actually used to that. I promise not to use math. What do you think? Why do you live on Cape Cod? You all chose to live here at one point. Why? Beautiful beaches. Yeah, water. What was that? Women? Swimming. Oh, okay. I was like, okay. All right, slide, please. Yeah, most of us come here. You can go to the next slide, please. For things like lighthouses or beaches, or maybe the cute little main streets that you see in Falmouth or Chatham or Dennis, wherever. But we're drawn to live by the water. Turns out we're not the only ones drawn to live by the water. So you can go to the next slide, please. So it's a little hard to see with the light. What we're looking at here is a nighttime picture of the world. And what I'd hoped you'd be able to see is you'd be able to see all the little spots of light in the world and notice where they are. They're on the edges of the continents. They're along major river systems. Turns out everybody wants to live near the water. In fact, globally, if you look at where all our major cities are, this big white spot up here is New York, Philadelphia area, right? Boston's a little bit to the right. We all live really close to the coast. In fact, it's something like 40% of the global population lives within 63 miles of the coast. Everything we do in that zone affects the coast. So we're going to look at that a little bit. Things you do in your backyard, especially as you live right on the water, affect the water around you. So slide, please. So this high population, especially now on Cape Cod, there's something like 200,000 residents on Cape Cod now, puts a lot of nitrogen into the system. And what nitrogen does, whether you put it on your lawn or you put it in the waters, it stimulates plant growth. Almost any form of nitrogen you put in. That's why you're putting it on your lawn. And what you can see in this picture, maybe with the light, is you see this green halo around Cape Cod. That green halo are the plants growing in the waters around Cape Cod. Some of that's completely natural. Some of that is a little bit forced by our additional nitrogen. Plants in the ocean are a little bit different than plants in your front yard. Plants in the ocean are microscopic, usually single cellular, and they grow really, really quickly. And so once you can dump some nitrogen into your water system, within a few days, you might see it green up just like that. Slide, please. So I'm a chemist. I have 2 slides of actual chemistry. I promise that's it, and then we'll move on. The way I see the nitrogen cycle, how nitrogen moves through a system, is through a set of what I'm going to draw up here on these arrows. Dr. Costa was talking about total nitrogen. Total nitrogen is the entire diagram I'm about to show you. Okay? What we usually look at is not total nitrogen, but some of the species in here, because the species in here tells me what we're doing. I could look at your total bank account. That tells me something, right? What's more informative is if I look at each individual transaction, right? Then I can say something about what you're doing, okay? That's kind of the analogy that we're going to use here. So if we start at the top of this, we have Up here we have something called ammonium. Ammonium is the breakdown product of all the nitrogen that we're putting into the system, all the organic nitrogen that we're putting into the system, whether it's the food you're throwing away, what you flush down the toilet, it's all organic, and it's going to come out eventually as ammonium. Ammonium, if there's oxygen around, can very quickly be metabolized by natural bacteria to this form, nitrate, down here. What makes nitrate pretty special is that it is almost entirely stable in an oxic environment if there's oxygen around, and it moves really quickly through the environment. So imagine you have a septic tank at your house. You're putting nitrogen into the ground there. There's oxygen. That ammonium quickly goes to nitrate. That nitrate in the groundwater moves very, very quickly out to Bass River, right? Very quickly. In order to get rid of the nitrate, in order to get rid of this additional nitrogen, we have to get this nitrate into a zone that doesn't have oxygen. We call that an anaerobic zone. Slide, please. In the anaerobic zone, we have another set of bacteria that can carry out this process. And it's a set of different reactions. We call this denitrification because it's denitrifying, taking nitrogen out of the system. And ultimately, it ends as N2 gas. N2 gas is 80% of the molecules you just breathe in and breathe out, right? Perfectly fine in the atmosphere. That's where we want to get it back to. The trick is, to move nitrogen through an ecosystem, I need this coupling of oxic and anoxic environments. And that's a little bit hard to do. So nitrogen in the water column can be a big problem because the water column should have oxygen. In the sediments typically go anoxically, lose all their oxygen, just because there's a lot of carbon there, a lot of respiration going on. And so we can remove nitrogen from the sediment. So that's one of the things we look at in many different environments, is how do we get nitrogen from the water column down into the sediments and then back into the atmosphere. Again, once it's back into the atmosphere, it's benign, right? That's where it's supposed to be. Slide, please. So what we did this summer, the goal of this summer was to set sort of a baseline of where the estuary is right now. It is one of the largest estuaries on Cape Cod. We came down every 2 weeks with the crew. So again, we have Abby in the back and Kendall up here, and that one's Maddie, sort of in the foreground. And with the help of Aaron and Rick, they took us out in the boats, and we would go out sampling the water column, try and measure oxygen, measure nitrogen species. We did some sediment measurements. We did a lot of measurements on the up and down the bay. Slide, please. So the goal of this whole thing was to set up a way to train these students. They're the next generation of scientists. I'm not as young as I used to be. I want to train them how to do this sort of thing. Their generation is going to have to be able to do things that my generation wasn't really forced to do. My generation, we can just talk to other scientists. We don't have to talk to anybody else. They're not going to get away with that. Because it turns out if a scientist only talks to other scientists, the science goes nowhere. If the scientists talk to people who can actually make decisions, people who live in that community, the science is much more impactful. That's really what we want to do with the science. So we want to train these kids to do that. Sorry, these women. Forgive my age. The kids. So that's one goal. The other goal that we had with this project going forward is we really want to create a pipeline of kids coming up and seeing that this is a career path that they can do. It's one thing for a high school kid to see me. I'm 44 years old, so I'm 20 plus years, 25 years older than them, right? I have 3 college degrees behind my name right now. They can't see that jump. That's too big of a jump. These ladies are 4 years older than them, maybe. They don't have a degree yet, right? But they're actually doing the science. And so it's a lot easier jump for the high school kid to see, oh, here's this woman who's just a couple years older than me doing this thing. You don't need to go all the way to the end. You can do something right now. It makes it a real path for them. The reason everyone coming into the college and coming to my office for advice always wants to be a medical doctor, because that's the only educated person that's sort of like the ultimate goal. They don't know there are other goals out there, right? So it's always medical doctor. And then they tell me they hate bio. Slide, please. So we started this internship called the Cape Cod Environmental Restoration Internship, and that's how Abby and Kendall were paid over the summer. This was a weird summer. They could have made a whole lot more working for Dunkin' Donuts this summer. But that's how we paid them, because they're working their summer, they're worth their wages. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide, please. In the coming years, we want to collaborate more with the DY school system and get the high school students especially involved in some of these projects. We've heard that some of them are doing the volunteer monitoring, and we'd like to get them out on the boats and do some of the other sampling as well. We use slightly different tools than the volunteers do. It'd be nice to get them into a research lab and see what that does. We've been engaged with the volunteers a little bit. We took their data from last year that Amy and her crew processed. We did the data analysis on it for them. And so we use that as a training source for my students as well, teach them how to use a computer language. So we're trying to do this collaboration piece as well. Slide, please. You can go to the next one. So this is the estuary. I'll use this one over here because it's bigger and you can see it. Mill Pond, Fallon's Pond, Kelly's Bay. The Sentinel site's right about there, I think. And the Cape Cod Rail Bridge is right in there. We're focusing on the upper part of the estuary. So we're focusing on Mill Pond. The culvert is right here, I think. Fallon's Pond, Kelly's Bay, and a couple other spots down in here. Again, I said we want to start by just getting where we are now. As we start to make improvements, as we maybe replace that culvert by Way Road, does the system improve? We need to have a baseline first. So for this bay, what the MEP report showed is that population has increased a bit since 1960, 1970. So we had 5,000 people in 1960, 25,000 people in 2010, more now. Population is skyrocketing. That's the problem that we're facing. 75% of the nitrogen load is coming from septic-like sources. We can't definitively say it's septic, but I can tell you it has been through a gut, right? I can use chemistry to tell you that. And we have to do a lot to get the nitrogen out. So the Sentinel station is right here, and MEP says what we want the nitrogen to be there is something about, they say 42 milligrams of total nitrogen. I've converted that because I use different numbers to 30 micromolar, all right? Don't worry about the unit. We'll cover that next class. Slide, please. Thank you. So what we're looking at here is some of the report from Mass Estuaries Project. And the only takeaway I want you to have here is in the red circles, we have H is healthy, MI is moderately impacted, SI is severely impacted. Severely is worse than moderately. And there's an SD, a severely degraded piece. All of these places are severely impacted to moderately impacted. So we have Mill Pond on the far left, Fallon's Pond, Kelly's Bay, Dinah's Pond right there. They're all severely impacted. And that was 2003 data, 2006 data, I think, is where the two starts of their runs. And so it's severely impacted. Slide, please. So what we did is every 2 weeks, we came out here, jumped on the boats, and we measured the chemistry of the water column at a bunch of different sites up in this upper region of the estuary. We measure things like salinity and temperature, dissolved oxygen, it's an important factor. We also measure nitrate, ammonium, and we set out some sediment traps. Slide, please. These sediment traps, this is Emily. Emily's holding our sediment trap, one of them. What these sediment traps do is they sit on the bottom of the water column on the sediments, and they trap sediments falling in. That allows us to measure the amount of particulate nitrogen being added to the water column routinely. It allows us to measure the composition of the plants that are growing and dying in the water column, where that nitrogen is ultimately going. And it allows us to quantify how much nitrogen is actually coming through that system. On these sediment traps, those little green things are light sensors, and so we can monitor light in real time along with these things, with these sediment traps. Turns out plants and light tend to correlate, right? So that's why we're measuring light. Slide, please. So we started off by measuring, we're going to talk about nitrate first. In most systems, we measure nitrate. We see nitrate come up. When there's lots and lots of organics being put in, lots of nitrogen being put in, I see it in the nitrate signal. Remember from that first arrow chart that I said, the only two slides on chemistry, we started as ammonium, and if there's oxygen, we go directly to nitrate really quickly. So we should see a pulse of nitrate come out. We actually don't see that. So these are depth profiles. So the top of the figure is the surface of the water column, and we're going down towards the sediments. We measure depth. This is the average for the summer. We routinely see this sort of fairly well mixed mill pond. It's shallow, so that's why it looks like that. We see a little bit of buildup in Fallon's Pond. Towards the bottom, it starts to increase slightly for nitrate, and in Kelly's Bay, it's pretty well mixed as well. Again, very shallow. But there's not a lot of nitrate in there. So we turned our attention to ammonium, starting of that nitrogen cycle. So slide, please. Was there one before it? Oh, I'm missing a slide. Try one after it. There we go. Okay. They're out of order. That's my own fault because I made this presentation. So this is our ammonium data. Now again, I almost never see ammonium in a water column. Where I do see ammonium in a water column, I see it off the coast of Chile, where we have really, really productive waters. I see lots of ammonia because there's lots of plant growth, lots of plants dying, and they're growing and dying so quickly that the ammonium can build up. The other place I see ammonium build up are waters that have lost their oxygen. If you don't have oxygen, the ammonium can't be reacted, can't be oxidized is the proper term. And so it sits there and builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up. That's what we're seeing in Fallon's Pond especially. We're seeing it in Mill Pond as well. And so what we're seeing here is it's fairly well mixed to the water column. Some build up in the bottom of Fallon's Pond. But we're seeing lots and lots and lots of ammonium. The red line there is the total allowable nitrogen in the system. So if we're to the right of it, we have way too much nitrogen. If we're to the left of it, we're okay. Again, this is only the dissolved nitrogen. That red line is the total nitrogen. So of all those species that I showed you in that triangle diagram, bless you, this is just the two dissolved species. So the dissolved species alone are getting above the total maximum limit, right? I didn't bring the sediment data, but the sediment data shows that we're even higher above it. We're sitting roughly about twice the maximum nitrogen limit if we include the particulate matter. So there's lots and lots of nitrogen in these systems. We're going to see how that goes as we make improvements. Slide, please. So if we just look at the dissolved data from 2003 to now, we see we're roughly the same. We're still right around 70 with a pretty big range over the course of the summer. In Mill Pond, similar in Fallon Pond, similar in Kelly's Bay. These slight decreases could be a function of there's more water in the system, right? It was a rainy summer, right? You guys remember trying to go out in July? It was a lot of rain. That could be one function of it. It could be there might have been slight improvements in the surrounding area over the last 20 years. A lot of people have changed their septic tanks. A lot of Title V remediations have been done. There could be some of that. Many towns, I don't know if Yarmouth and Dennis have, but many towns have outlawed the use of fertilizer on lawns, which makes a big difference. We've seen a huge difference in Falmouth doing that. So slide, please. So going forward, what we want to do is really continue this study. There's a lot of data I haven't shown you. There's 2 theses coming out of this summer's work, undergraduate theses. One focused on the water column, one focused on the sediments. We want to continue this. We want to continue training students to come up behind us and take over this. We want to continue working with, or start working with the DY system so we can train younger kids and get them interested in this at a younger age so they can pursue it in college. Make this multi-year effort work. Friends of Bass River have been successful in obtaining some grants to do some of the improvements. So I believe the culvert is going to be exchanged up at where Bay is going to be improved. This is what we're interested in looking at. We have the before picture. We want to come back and get the after picture. So that's what we'll be doing in the years to come. Slide, please. So how can you help? Well, you can get involved. An organization like this is one of the steps you can do. Make your voice heard at town meetings. Make wise decisions concerning your own property. Do you really need to put 20 kilograms of nitrogen onto your lawn? Probably not. Things like this really help. Get involved with the organization. A group of people can do a lot of things if they start working together. We've seen this a lot in other bays. We had one pond in Falmouth that was entirely closed to really any recreational activity. Over about a 10-year period, the community group of homeowners around the pond band together and started doing some things to increase the tidal exchange in the pond. Last summer we opened, not last summer, summer before. Last summer was COVID summer, nothing happened. The summer before, we opened that pond to shellfishing again. So small groups doing things together can make a huge difference, and I applaud you all for coming and doing that. So thank you.
So probably everyone in this room is familiar with the challenges we've had of establishing septic treatment in our towns of Yarmouth and Dennis. And I know for a fact that the plan for Yarmouth in the area of Mill Pond is a 40-year plan. So it's certainly not in my lifetime. But my good friend Alex Hackman from Mass DER will talk about some alternatives that can help us right away, help us water quality. He's going to talk about a plan that I'm very excited about.
Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it. Hi, folks. Good afternoon. Oh, excuse me. I have a big voice, so I'll try to find that right balance here. Fellas, mind if I think I'll drive once you get it set up. Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much. Nice to be with you in 3 dimensions. I was just thinking, since the pandemic begun, I've given probably a dozen talks, but they've all been in front of my computer screen. And I was thinking, wow, this is the first time I've worn shoes to a talk in 18 months. So I appreciate y'all being here. It's nice to see the sunset out here. And I'm going to talk to you about restoring wetlands on old cranberry farms because you're doing that in the upper Bass River watershed. So I thought it might be helpful for y'all to see what that looks like, what goes into it, and kind of get your head around that and what to think about as you embark on this journey together in the next couple years. All right, here we go. But first I want to, like some of the other speakers, just pause to say thank you to you all for what you're doing to care for the natural resources in your backyard. Many of you are giving your time. You're giving your time right now to be here. Many of you are giving resources, Some of you are getting in the mud with those water samplers, but everyone in this room certainly has a passion for nature and a care for the plants and animals that live in it. So thank you all for that. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a nice action shot of Rick in there too, right in the middle of the screen. Because of folks like you and around the Commonwealth, we have a number of agencies at the state level that get to do that, get to try to help nature. And I work for one of those groups, the Division of Ecological Restoration. So I work for all of you. I'm a public servant that works for you, and I get the job of trying to repair our wetlands and rivers. So thank you. It's a great job. I love it, and I hope to bring some of that passion to you tonight. So this is what we do. These are the projects that my group does. We're about 20 of us. We work proactively with landowners who want to make positive changes on their properties, not because they have to for a permit, not because they have to because they damaged it somewhere else. This is proactive landowners who want to do something good. Kind of like the town of Yarmouth with the Upper Bass River wants to do with the project you all are embarking on. So dam removals, culvert replacements, bridge replacements, that's the kind of stuff we do. Our success is judged when we complete projects. So we're project-based, action-oriented, project-based, working with partners. Each of these projects I'm going to talk about involves a dozen or more organizations, and your project will be no different when it's all said and told. My job at that agency is to lead this program. Believe it or not, there's so much opportunity to restore wetlands and old cranberry bogs that we made a program to do just that, and I lead that program. Staff of 2, me and one other person. However, even though there are only 2 of us, we are working with 35 other organizations in the region connected to do this. Landowners, researchers, nonprofits, federal agencies, state agencies, local organizations, private sector, for-profit, private sector, not-for-profit, cross-sector collaboration. Before I move forward, I want to give a special thanks to a few individuals. You can't read their names on that screen, but I'm going to say them. First is Brian Wick. He's the executive director of the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association, very close partner with us. Second is my dear friend Helen Castles. She works for the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Many of the cranberry farms that have been retired into conservation have received payment for conservation through her program that she runs. There's a federal program to pay farmers to retire their land into permanent protection. Another is my friend Chris Neal from the Woodwell Climate Research Center. I suspect some of you might see him kicking around your site in the years ahead. He's one of our lead partners in trying to learn about these projects, what's happening with the plants and the soils. Another is my friend Gloriana Davenport. She runs a group called Living Observatory. And if you look on the web and you type in Living Observatory, you can find a report that they put together in partnership with my program that tells you everything we've learned about these projects over the past 10 years. It's a nice little snappy online document full of pictures. And the last person is my friend Nick Nelson at Interfluve. He's a consultant who's really helped develop a lot of the techniques I'm going to show you on the pictures that are coming up in partnership with me and others over the past decade. So how did we get into this thing? So about 15 years ago, we got an opportunity in the town of Plymouth. 2 small family-owned farms on this cranberry bog decided to retire. The program was enrolled in that federal program I told you about. Farmers were retired. The land got permanently protected, so no development could happen, no more farming could happen. Then the town bought it for public open space. So you can go there, park in a lot, walk around it, and they said, let's do a restoration project here. It has never been done before. No one ever tried to turn cranberry bog back into something like an Atlantic white cedar swamp that's globally rare before. So we said, let's give that a shot. Here's some pictures of what it looked like. Typical cranberry farm. Y'all have seen these in the region. The lower right-hand picture, which I know is a little small for the room, there are little pine trees coming up. So it's really dry. That's the point I'm trying to make to you in that photo, is it's dry. That's what it looked like right before we started construction on the project. Here's what it looked like when we did the project. We made a big mess. Okay? And I can see a lot of the reactions in the crowd, and that's what I was hoping for. But this is what we did. And to do that took about 3 years of talking to regulators. We had never done this before. We had to work through the contaminant issues, the permitting issues. We're going in and doing edge-to-edge disturbance in a regulated resource area. You can't do that. But we We said, yeah, sure, this is disturbance for rejuvenation. That's what it looked like when we completed the project. That upper left hand, basically the sea of water and mud, we're done. My machines left the site. And then about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months later, it looked like that. And all those plants that you see coming up were buried underground. We didn't plant more than a few of those. And that stream that you see in front of you there was dug by machines. All those pieces of wood were put there. That's less than a year after that mud flat. There's what it looked like 7 years later. That looks pretty good. That's pretty lush. It's got 13 kinds of peat there. It's sequestering carbon. It's also removing nitrogen. Healthy wetlands, that's one of the best things that healthy wetlands can do is remove nitrogen. And that's what it looked like last week. I was out there, I took a tour out there last week, and I took all these pictures on my camera. And one of the people in my tour said, well, I feel like I'm in Maine and a moose should walk through this scene. You know, and I thought, that's pretty good. For 11 years after making a mud flat, that makes me feel pretty good. I couldn't get a better compliment, right? So that's the first project. And we've been able to track its development like our baby for the 11 years. Right now it's getting into early adolescence. And that's good that the first project went well. We tried a lot of stuff that had never been tried before, and we lifted our head up and we said, oh my gosh, look how many cranberry bogs there are in Massachusetts. 13,500 acres. That map shows the bogs. It doesn't show the areas of uplands that are owned by those farmers as well. So 13,000 acres of bogs, another 60,000 acres of forest around the bogs. Okay? Now, I want to be clear about what the state's doing for cranberry farming in Massachusetts. This is a culturally significant, iconic, economically vital industry to the state. I'm certainly not here to say, let's turn all the cranberry bogs back into wetlands, and neither is the state. The state is doing a multi-pronged approach to this. One is provide funding and grants to renovate your farm to compete. That's where most of the resources is, and there's my little program. For those that want to retire and leave an environmental legacy for their community, maybe they don't have their kids who want to take it over, that's where my little program comes in. So we're dealing with a little over a dozen properties. We have no intention of disrupting the economics of this vital industry. But there are a lot of them. And as I'm going to show you, they're having problems right now. So this graph from my friend Chris Neal at the Woodwell Climate Research Center is showing you production. Now, Massachusetts used to be the leader in cranberry production. That's the red line at the bottom of the graph. This time is on the bottom and production's on the y-axis. So you got the red line's Massachusetts, the green line's Wisconsin. So the point I'm trying to make to you here is in about the year 2000, Wisconsin overtook Massachusetts production and now is way out producing what we're doing here in Massachusetts. So the out-of-state competition is winning. There are a lot of reasons for that. They have newer farms. They're precisely leveled and engineered. They're not growing cranberries in old knobbly swamps like we are here. It's hard to grow cranberries in old swampland. A lot of reasons. Out-of-state competition's winning. The other thing that's happening is the cranberry industry's had to go through this roller coaster of pricing up and downs. This is why at times people get into the game, at other times people get out of the game. But that's what this, so we have time on the bottom and we have price on the y-axis here. So starting back in the 80s, we had juice, so prices went up, and then we overbought, and then we got craisins, and a lot of people got into the business, and then we overproduced, prices crashed. It's tough to be a cranberry farmer, and so here we are. This graph only goes out to about 2019, but you can see prices are really low right now. Okay, so it's hard to stay in business. And so what we're seeing is a lot of retirement. I mentioned to you 13,500 acres of cranberry bogs. The estimate is that maybe 5,000 acres will retire in the next, say, decade or so. So what's happening in response? You know, these are farms where maybe the children don't want to take it over, you're losing money, you got to do something. You have all your resources invested in the land. And so decisions like this are being made across our landscape. Some of you have seen this, right? You've seen houses being built up around the edge of old bogs. You know, you've seen solar arrays go up in some of these places, right? Some of the landowners are mining the sand and the gravel. These are parts of the story of transition. The other thing that's happening is just abandonment. So if you're losing money and you can't figure out what to do, and it actually costs less to just do nothing, we see a lot of this. So you walk away from your fields for a couple years, it starts to look like this, right? And I'm a wetland ecologist, so remember I'm talking to you about making wetlands back in these places. So when you abandon this site right here, can anyone tell me where the wetland is in this picture? Sorry, sir? Oh, no, this is off of Beaver Dam Road in Plymouth. Sorry. I mean in that picture. And the punchline is the wetland's really just that little ribbon of water right down the middle of the farm. The rest of it's growing up dry. You see the pine trees. It's dry. That has implications. We already talked about the importance of wetlands for water quality. So if this old wetland that then became a farm is now going toward a forest, it's not doing those wetland things like removing nitrogen, like providing habitat for critters, storing water, and giving you a place to go walk around, enjoy bird watching, the other things we like to do in natural places. Okay? I get this question all the time. Alex, why are you bothering with these cranberry bogs? Won't you they're built on old wetlands, just do nothing. They're going to become wetlands again. And I would say to you that some definitely will. This is a site we're working on in Carver. Can anyone, I know it's really too small, but can anyone make out what those little plants are that are coming up there? Sorry, if we're on our screen, you could see that, right? If we're on Zoom. There's definitely a lot of poison ivy out there, but what those are little red maple trees. All right, and this is actually still being farmed. So this land it wants to be a red maple swamp. You stop farming, it's going to be a red maple swamp. Now it's going to have a straight channel running down the middle that might hold a little bit of water, become a mosquito hazard, but that's going to be technically a wetland. And I see that. I also see places like this across the landscape. This is, believe it or not, an old cranberry farm. All right? That's not a wetland anymore. That's transitioned to something else. That's transitioned to become a forest. This is what you all have going on in the upper Bass River right now, by the way. But there's a wetland buried underneath it. And so we've had over a decade to think about why is that. And so this slide, I don't know if you can read the text. This is what I say, that legacy impacts of farming impact the ability of the wetland to recover. So farming may stop, but the impacts remain. That's why I'm calling them legacy impacts. The primary one I'm showing you on the left there, I hope you can see that. It's my friend Nick Nelson. He's in a pit that we dug with an excavator, and he's testing the soil. And where the green arrow is, there's a black layer of soil there. That's the old wetland. That's peat. If you grab that, it smells like rotten eggs. It's a wetland. You don't need a scientist to tell you. It's the old wetland. It's got pieces of wood in it. It's peat. Between the green and the red is sand. And if you look carefully, I don't think you'll be able to see it. It's like a Kit Kat bar. There's a layering effect there. Some of you can see it up front. In cranberry farming, you add sand every couple years for a variety of reasons. And so that's 2 feet of sand that was basically put on this site over the 120 years it was a farm. Now, it actually would be more like 10 feet if you did the math and added up, but that's compacted through a century of rainfall, from a century of people being on it. Compacted. It's super heavy. It's like a 1 million-pound blanket smothered in the old wetland. And you know what else? If you're a plant that used to live in that black soil that's wet, what kind of plant do you think would have lived in that? Trick question, not a trick question. Well, a wetland plant, because it's wet. On top of that sand, of 2 feet of sand, it's dry. You're no longer a wetland plant. Okay, so that's the fundamental thing that I'm trying to get across. There's a wetland under that upsite in the upper Bass River, but it's buried. The other legacy impacts of these sites that limit its ability just to come back in many places are a number of things. Mostly it's ditched. The sites are ditched. That helps dry and drain the site too. There are dams. The way in which water moves around the site is just heavily modified. So the message I want to deliver to you is we have a toolbox to address those impacts, do something about that, and repair these sites to be wetlands again. And, you can read about this in more detail. There are groups like the Society for Ecological Restoration. You can download for free this thing called International Principles and Standards for the Practice of Ecological Restoration. And guess what? There's a picture of a restored cranberry bog on the cover, which makes me very happy. But we're not going to go into that deep dive tonight, but all that stuff's available if you're interested. But I do want to talk about a definition. What is restoration? You know, you guys are starting this journey together, thinking about the headwaters. What is restoration, first of all? Is it going back to the time of dinosaurs? What is it? Well, I'm going to offer you this definition to perhaps guide your thinking. It guides my thinking. It comes again from the Society for Ecological Restoration. It says, it's the process of assisting in recovery of an ecosystem that's been damaged, degraded, or destroyed. There's so much to love about this definition. First is it's a process. This is a relationship with the land. This is not a landscaping job where you hire people, come in, do plants, install irrigation, it's green, you're done. This is more than that. This is a relationship. Ecosystem is another good term here. At least in the paradigm that we use, we're not talking about restoration that benefits a single species, one type of fish, one type of plant, one type of butterfly, but rather the entire system. The living and the non-living interacting together in complex ways. That's the engine of life that's an ecosystem. And then assisting in recovery. I mean, my God, we could spend 2 hours talking about that term. Such a great term. Undefined in this definition. So I'm a practitioner of this, so we have to figure out how do you assist in recovery. And again, I'm going to be kind of quick here. Just want to offer another great paper to read if people want to unpack this more. We go to literature. We say, what do people say? How do I assist in recovery? You read decades of papers. You develop a theoretical background. And for us, I'm going to just distill all that down, all that 2 decades literature down into this simple thing that we've taken away for cranberry bogs. Focus on the movement and storage of water. That's what matters for a wetland. That's the engine of what makes a wetland. Can the land hold water? What makes a wetland? There's water on it, okay? That's a physical process. The landscape storing water is a process and how it moves around. So that's what we focus on. We made a 5-step recipe to do restoration on any single site. And I'm going to give it to you real quick. I know there's a lot of words here, but I'm going to show you what it looks like. Number 1 is get to know the site really well. This is critical for what you're undertaking in the headwaters. There's been a lot of change over the years. There's a lot of plumbing system up there. You got to understand what was there and how it was changed before you can diagnose it accurately and make prescriptions for healing. The next thing is, number 2, focus on what matters. So I'm telling you, it's the storage and movement of water on the land. That's the engine for wetland health. Number 3, figure out how that's been interrupted by the last century of modifications by humans up there. You know, you've got that undersized culvert, you've got a crushed culvert, you've got 50 acres of cranberry farms and all the ditches and berms and water control structures, and they got sand on top of that. You got to inventory all that. And that then allows you to plan how you're going to address those comprehensively and logically to try to heal your patient. And then you turn the keys over to nature and give it time. That's Mother Nature and Father Time. That's the process. Okay? So this is what we do on cranberry bog projects. We apply that recipe and we say, look, I showed you we have that sand impact we have to overcome, right? This is what we do. We get out there with a big machine like that, and we bust it up, literally like that. We'll sit there in a swamp mat, turn the soil over, plug the ditches, uncompact it, and we'll remove some of that sand. And you know what that does? That helps the groundwater that's underneath that sand just come up a little bit. And by uncompacting the soil, those plants can start to wick some of that water up. And you could start to have different kinds of plants again. To address the simplification, and by that I mean the straightening of the channels, the ditches, the flattening of the surface, we busted up. You saw that first picture. You saw that first picture I showed you, the mud flat with all the mud. We often construct new channels, we add wood. All that works to activate the native seed bank. And then to address the dams and the other barriers, just pull them, remove them, let the water move around freely. So that's the recipe. And you're going to apply much of that recipe in the upper part of the Bass River. It's just going to be a little different. Here's what that looks like. This is Tidmarsh Farms. It's the Tidmarsh Wildlife Sanctuary now up in Plymouth. I was a project manager for that project. This is 2016 or 15 when we started construction. So here you go. You see it's dry. You got the pine trees again. This is the old cranberry bog. There's a machine out there in the middle. That's the start. Here's what it looks like when we dug the channel going through it, busted up the soil, flipped it over, scattered wood. We're done. That's when my machines left. That project, we are done. Turn the keys over to Mother Nature and give it time. That's less than 1 year later. All the plants you see in there were just underground as seed. That's 1 year later. And there it is 2 years later. You know, and in that time period, Mass Audubon acquired the property. Now it's a nature sanctuary that you can visit. Here's a project we did up in Plymouth also last year. This was from last summer, I think. This is where an example of removing sand. So we knew at this location there was an old kettle hole peat deposit, basically an underground bathtub full of peat, where glaciers had come in, dropped an ice chunk, left. 10,000 years later, it's full of partially decomposed plants. So we said, well, let's pull some of the sand off of that to expose that peat and that seed and see what happens. That's during it. That's what it looked like. A couple months later, as that area just filled up with water, you know, again, we're just trying to relieve the pressure that humans have put on the land, and nature responds quickly. You can see hydrologically how it responded. And I took this picture a couple weeks ago. That's about 15 months after that mud flat. Again, none of that's planted. Another picture of that property, and you've seen many of these pictures now, right? You're like, this is the recipe for doing cranberry bog wetland restoration. Plug ditches, uncompact the soil, scatter some wood. The water starts to come to the surface. It becomes wet again, and then boom, 6 months later, you start to get the plants growing again. So you know you're on the trajectory to having a wetland again. These are wetland plants here, not pine trees for a forest. You can't really see that, but we have about 15 of these projects going around the state right now. We've completed 6, so the whole portfolio is 21. I've circled your project in red. You can't see that at all, sorry. But they're scattered throughout the region, trust me. And this is what it looks like up in the headwaters. And y'all are playing nature detective as part of this project. You kind of have to squint your eyes to see that was an old cranberry bog. But you see that water control structure that's rusted out. You see the straight channel. You see the berm. You look at old historic maps and you can see that's an old cranberry bog. You look at even older historical maps and you see there's a river running through there before the cranberry bog. So this is your grand adventure that awaits, and I hope that some of those pictures of how to do it to turn it back into a wetland are helpful. In closing, I want to offer some of the same sentiments as the last speaker. What can you do? What you're doing tonight is great, being here, building community support. People in this room can help identify the next project. It's all about personal relationships. Literally. Someone owns an old dam that's falling down, blocking fish passage. Oh, they want to remove it? Oh, let's call Alex. We can remove that dam. Oh, a farmer whose kids don't want to take it on and it's in a good place to remove nitrogen in your watershed? Call me up. Maybe there's a project there. But it's people meeting people that make projects come to light. And then lastly, I would say support the organization. You're doing that. I hope you continue to do that. I'm going to leave you with this picture. When you get involved in these projects, when you get dirty, when you get in the river, it feels good. You can't see the faces on that screen, but everyone is smiling, okay? Because you're doing something in your backyard and it's permanent. And it's for everybody. It's for people and nature. So with that, I will show you a picture of, again, what a site up in Plymouth looked like a year after a restoration, and give you my email address if anyone wants to get in touch with me. And thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Always a pleasure, man. Thank you.
It's tough to follow Alex Hackman, that's all I can say. Big news for Friends of Bass River. Last year we applied for something called a SNEP grant, Southern New England Estuaries Project. Alex mentioned our project, and it's not widely known, but we are way down the road with a similar project in the Bass River headwaters. We were awarded $256,000 to pay for developing the plan and do the study necessary to complete this project. Right now, I have a 60% design plan for turning the 57 acres of old cranberry bogs in the Bass River, upper Bass River headwaters into a project very much like Alex just shared with you. And we're really excited about that. Something a little more dramatic is we also involved a company called Ty and Bond, an engineering firm. And I think in the video you might recall that I showed a 6-foot wide culvert in the North Dennis Road. They're recommending a 60-foot wide bridge at that spot to get full exchange. So we're really, really excited about the progress we've made. And I've got to give a tip of the hat to the town of Yarmouth. Kelly Grant from Conservation, Jeff Colby from DPW, and Carl Van Hoen from Natural Resources have been so supportive of our action. We had bi-weekly project update meetings with all the consultants, Woods Hole Group, a company called Interfluve, and Ty and Bond, and we have made just tremendous project. And I can't tell you how excited I am about the next steps, but it's really great. Can I get everyone to stand up and shake their arms for a minute? We've been sitting for quite a while. Just. Great, thank you. So next is Robert Antico. He's from Mass DOT. He has a Zoom presentation on the Route 28 Bridge project. And we are at the 25% design stage for that. So everyone can sit down and we'll get Robert going. Thank you.
So we're going to see if we can get this to work. Charlie, who's part of my team, if he could just have the screen, and he's going to put up a slideshow, and we'll get started. Rick, can you confirm that you're ready for us? Can you give us a thumbs up?
Okay. Robert, we're ready to go.
Who's going to allow me to share?
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. So again, I'm Robbie Antico. I'm from MassDOT Major Projects. We're managing this Dennis Yarmouth Bridge replacement project. I'm going to start by introducing our team. We have Charlie Swanson, Kevin Morrison, Kevin Slattery from HDR, and Taylor Miller from Holloway Stein Hudson, who's helping us with some of the public relations, where HDR is the design team. I will say that this project is eventually going to be combined with the adjacent project that I'm sure you've heard about. We'll be in front of the public here again shortly. So when I say shortly, we're hoping sometime, most likely in December, for a design public hearing. Our 25% design is complete, so this is a good opportunity for us, and we thank you to give you sort of just a focused presentation on just the bridge rather than the two projects combined. So Charlie, if you go to the next project, slide, where I could talk about our project goals. As you know, the bridge is structurally deficient, so our goal is to replace the entire bridge. And here's an example of what's going on. You can see that the piles have reached their life and useful life, I should say. So we're going to replace it. And our goal is to provide a multimodal bridge that's safe and comfortable for all users. During construction, we want during construction, we want to minimize impacts to all the traveling public over the bridge, as well as all the river users beneath the bridge and the abutment. And our goal is to keep 2 travel lanes throughout construction, matching what's out there now, which would essentially keep traffic flowing close to what you see now. And there's always going to be some impacts, but we feel if we're keeping the 2 travel lanes that it should be pretty close to the traffic flow now. Additionally, we're going to be doing construction in the off season, which we have winter on the slide here, but more focused on that fall, winter, spring, as opposed to the peak summer traffic. And throughout the construction, we'll also be maintaining pedestrian access across the bridge. So you're all familiar with the project location, I think, being the bridge, which connects Yarmouth and Dennis. Our exact limits for just the bridge project itself is Pleasant Street, Bellevue Ave in Yarmouth, across the bridge and ending at the driveway at Bass River Park in Dennis. So at this point here, I'm going to pass it over to Charlie, our design engineer. He's going to get into more of the technical aspects of the design. Charlie?
Thank you, Rob. Sorry, folks, that we are unable to be there in person. It would be a lot easier, I think, but we're going to give this a whirl. So I'm going to go over some of the where we are in 25% design plans and go over some of the aspects of the design that would have the most impact or the most interest for you guys. So I know you've seen the proposed bridge plan before. The last time we were there, we got it. We've kind of updated. It's tough to see. I don't know how big of a screen it is in the room, but on the plan set now, we've added in the bulb outs, which are kind of in the sidewalk bulb outs for people to have like a looking areas up and down, north and south on the river. There's going to be 2 on each side, and they're going to be opposite of the. They're going to be on the. They're going to be symmetrical about the navigational channel. The other thing to note is we also have added in some. In here, there's some red lines, red symbols for the lights. We've been working with a light manufacturer and some photometrics. And this is the preliminary layout that we have for lights for the bridge. This is a proposed elevation view. As you can see, the navigational channel, the proposed navigational channel is much wider. It's 45 feet 8 inches clear span now between the columns in that navigational channel. And the vertical clearance is 15.6. I believe it's a little bit higher than existing. This has been submitted to the Coast Guard. Kevin Sliderly will talk about that a little bit later on. I'll ask him to chime in on that. We've reduced the number of piers in the river. If you look in this picture, you can see the dashed lines down here under the bottom of the river. Shows the location of the existing ponds. And then the new pier locations are shown in the dark bold lines. As you can see, we've reduced the number of piles, obstructions within the river area quite a little bit. So that'll upgrade up to allow more flow in and out of the area. We have 4 spans at 72, 4 at 76, and 1 navigational channel at 50. Here is a cross section of the bridge. So the bridge deck width now, the proposed bridge deck width now is 60 foot 1 inches. It's the proposed is wider than the existing that's out there now. The roadway width is 36. 10 to 11 means to 7 for shoulders. This is now enough room when traffic is backed up on the bridge, that emergency vehicles can get across the bridge as we towns to get back to the hospital. And that. Will accommodate bikes and pedestrians and bikes in both directions. The reason why it is 12-foot wide, there's a couple reasons why. One is we needed to have enough width there in order to allow a bridge inspection vehicle to be able to run out there on that area, on that end, to allow inspection of the structure underneath. So we had to maintain that width in order to get a piece of equipment out there to look at it. And then on the north side, we have a sidewalk that's at 6'8" wide, and it is wider than your typical 5-foot sidewalk. So we have another larger sidewalk on the north side as well. How we ended up at this width was, you'll see in the construction staging that I go over later. Construction staging kind of set the widths, and then we adjusted the sidewalks to accommodate what we needed. At the ball route, this is just showing you what I was talking about. You get an extra lookout area on the north side and the south side of the bridge. But everything stays the same. We just have a ball route. Current project status, we are moving to a 25% design public hearing. The design is complete to 25%. We're ongoing coordination with adjacent projects, because the two of them are going to be combined together before it goes out to bid for the contractors. Field work, survey has been completed, preliminary environmental impact evaluation has been completed, geotech boring has been completed. Hydraulic study is in near completion and is actually getting close to being finished. And Coast Guard permit process has begun, and we are quite along in that process as well. At this point, Kevin, sorry, you want to give us an update on, you can go a little bit more about the environmental and Coast Guard?
And just to verify everyone can hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, so we are currently going through the permitting phase of the project. We've initiated, as Charlie mentioned, the coordination with the U.S. Coast Guard. We had an initial project initiation request in January of this year. We submitted the navigation impact report in late winter, and we made a request for a preliminary navigation determination from the U.S. Coast Guard. We're still awaiting that process to be concluded. There's a whole bunch of permits required for a project like this, as you can imagine. There's DEP permits, there's U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, there's a bunch of cooperating, coordinating federal agencies and state agencies. So one of those is the National Marine Fisheries Service under NOAA, where we're conducting essential fish habitat evaluations. Also Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act with NOAA for potential threatened endangered species in the coastal zone and in the waterways. We're also looking towards the Section 401 water quality certification for the project that would go hand in hand with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Section 404 permit. We did complete a National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA categorical exclusion document, so that's been reviewed, and I think at this point it's just a matter of moving forward into the next steps once we get into the next phase of design. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Rob, is there anything you want to add to that about where we are in design status and the field work?
No, I think that's accurate. I might just say that, do we have any other slides left, Charlie?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, we have
I'll
a
let you
few.
go through and I'll wrap up at the end.
Okay. Some of the aesthetic features for this project, these are kind of the ones that a lot of people have some interest in. The shared use path and sidewalk provide ample areas and access, as you can tell. Concrete beams maintain that classic Cape Cod look compared to the more urban steel or, hang on, let me go back. There we go. Compared to urban steel beams. Ornamental lights and railing, which we have been, we've met with the local folks down there from the towns to add those aesthetic treatments that they were requesting. And then also we have some minor walkway entrance enhancements that was requested by the towns. And I wanted to show you this. This is kind of showing you the type of lighting system that was that is being looked into to be placed on the structure. As you can see, very high off on the ends, not obstructed at all. Actually, looks really good. The railing system is going to be a bent bridge rail system, I guess is the best way to put it. Curved bridge rail system. It is, I believe it's the same bridge rail system as is on the Worcester, bridge project in Worcester. It was brought to our attention by the towns that they really like that rail. So we reached out and we are placing it on this structure. And then as I said earlier, the symmetrical backlots along the bridge. We've got some renderings to show you what these would look like, so you can take a peek at what it looks like. So this is on the south side. You got the shared use path with bikers, pedestrians, and then there's a guy sitting there fishing, but that is in the bulb out, so you still have plenty of room to use a shared use path, plus there's plenty of room in the overlook for people to gather and take views up and down the river. The environmental treatments, one of the last things I talked about was, one of the requests was the towns were asking for some local art installation at all four corners. This sketch, we showed Dennis on the left and the artist on the right. It's just to show you what that you're going to have you're going to have a feature at the Dennis side, two of them, and then features at the artist side as well. What we'll be doing for this project is we'll just be putting together a pedestal type of setup. And then the towns in the future, we're going to add in the art pieces. So when we get all said and done, we'll probably have a platform, and then we may just put like a globe or something up there just to be a placeholder until this town has the art to go in there. Alright, so what I talked a little bit about earlier, I'll go through pretty quickly, but this is a construction overview. We went through this a couple times when we were there and several town meetings. Construction staging. So what we do is we demolish the north fascia of the existing bridge first. And we got to allow for pedestrian access while we demolish the remaining bridge and build the remaining bridge. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take off the north side, north fascia, and build in the new, like a section of the pile cap and roadway to allow for pedestrian traffic during construction. It's the first phase. In the second phase, we start demolishing the south side of the bridge and replacing it with a new structure. So it's done in phases to always maintain 2 lanes of traffic in one in each direction during construction, and only a 10-foot lane, because that's all we can physically do. We met with the towns, we went over this, we met with the emergency personnel to make sure that everybody was okay with that. The reason why they wanted the 2 lanes next and adjacent to each other was to allow for emergency vehicles to go over the bridge if there was an emergency purpose. We could move people out of the way by police or whatever so that the emergency vehicles could get through. And as I said, we just keep going, the stages are going until you finish the bridge. And on the right, this is the finished bridge where everything comes together and meets across, and the last stage of construction before opening up and doing the final pieces. And as I said, this is the removing the barrier afterwards when we put the wearing surface and shift the joint traffic back over to the front of the bridge. And that's all I had.
Okay, thanks a lot, Charlie. So one thing I might add is that we're at 25%, as mentioned earlier. We're headed towards design public hearing, and we're roughly targeting sometime in December. And we'll be combining the two projects, presenting them at that meeting. And right now, we're targeting a spring of 23 advertisement date, and potentially later that year to start construction. But that's not necessarily definitive. We'll see how the design progresses and what comes out of the meeting. So if we have the ability to take some questions and provide some answers, we'd be willing to do that. Rick, is that something that can be done, or?
No, Robert, we're kind of...
Yeah, me, Rick.
Rob, unfortunately, we're a little tight on time, but I want to thank you all very much for your presentation today. It's answered a lot of questions for a lot of us.
Rick?
Thank you.
And the next presenter this afternoon, another presenter that's going to be talking about helping the flow of water through our river, which is really, really critical. Ken Carrillo is the director of the Barnstable County Dredge Program, and he's here to share the upcoming schedule for dredging in our river, which has been talked about for quite a while. And he also has a very interesting scientific fact to share with us that'll have implications for a lot of us. Ken, thanks so much.
What's that going to be? Thank you. I'll stay up here if I could, then I'll just flip the slides. So we're going to be following nutrients, chemistry, bogs, and bridges, and now we're going to be dredges. So I guess my first question is I want to see a show of hands of who knows what the Barnstable County Dredge Program, have you heard about the Barnstable County Dredge Program? Oh, pretty good. So about half. So I started this job August of 2020, so a year ago August, and I didn't know anything about it. I come from the private sector. I worked for CMAP. I ran the company that made the electronic charts that everybody used in their boats and their electronic navigation systems. And I saw this ad, and the project was being, the program was being reinvented. It had gone through a few years of some challenges on the dredges. We'll talk about that and all. So I stepped into a bit of a challenging situation, but it's been quite exciting to see the progress that we've made in a very short period of time. So this is a cool picture here. This is sort of the business edge of the dredge. This is the cutter head. This is what goes down on the bottom like a giant egg beater, and it spins and it sucks up the sand and whatever else we're dredging. It runs through the whole dredge. So you don't see this because it's always underwater, but it's kind of nice to start off with that as the picture. Next. Just a few shots here from projects that we did this past year. The one in the middle is the cool one from Pompanesett Bay. We did the approach channel, a nice drone shot that shows a very, very shallow tide shot on either side. And the lower right is Stage Harbor, which is a very big project for us annually now, as well as Poppy. Next slide. So why is the county doing this? I mean, the private sector could be doing it. There's a lot of other companies that do this. So back in 1996, there were projects being done. The state was reimbursing the towns, and then they decided, well, let's see if the county would be able to go ahead and manage and run their own program. So they were given a $1 million grant to buy a dredge, and the program was started. So next slide. So this concluded our 25th year this past year. So the program has been running for 25 years. The first dredge was the Codfish 1. That dredge is still in service, although this year it is pretty much at its end of life, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then 2 other dredges were purchased, one in 2017 and one in 2019. These are $1.8, $1.9, $2 million pieces of equipment. And that's the front part. The rest of it is maintaining it and doing all the work to keep these things running. Next slide. One of the things that's unique, which kind of is one of the reasons why I liked taking this job, was that it operates as an enterprise fund. It has its own separate P&L, its own profit and loss. The money is segregated. It doesn't go into the general fund of the county. So we operate, on our own. We are, break even plus keeping money and being able to have some money to be able to buy spare parts and reinvest. So it operates, with a incentive to be efficient and to do well. Next. It's lean. It's a very lean operation. We have myself, a superintendent, mechanical engineer, a maintenance engineer, deckhands, levermen. Those are the guys that are inside the box that move the levers around and control the dredge. And then deckhands. We have 2, and then we have 2 openings right now. If anybody wants a job here, maybe a few folks can use a little work over the winter. Next. And always it's interesting to stop because we deal in terms of cubic yards. So when we dredge, it's always the metric of how many cubic yards did you do. So what's a cubic yard? It sounds like a good joke, but it's 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. And what does that mean? It's a volume. But can it fit in a pickup truck? So it kind of says here you can put 2 yards and it's level. But then when you look at a job that we did this past year where we did 43,955 cubic yards, you kind of look and see that's a lot of sand. And it can go up and down in the height of the Empire State Building, 1,250 times. It's a lot of material. Next. And statistics. So, as I said, we just finished our 25th year. This past year, we dredged 591 cubic yards. And there was a record, the closest they came was several years ago, 110,000 cubic yards. So it was a very, very successful year. We did projects for 10 towns. The smallest one was just 203 cubic yards for Mill Creek in Yarmouth. And I'll show you some information on that a little bit. And the largest one was the 3rd year of a 3-year project for the town of Barnstable at Sampson Island. And then, of course, we have to run pipe. So the pipe goes from the dredge to where the disposal area is. So the longest pipe run we had was this past year, almost 2.2 miles of pipe. That's a lot of pipe from Stage Harbor, where we were dredging, all the way down to Cockles Cove. And that required 2 boosters because the distance was so long that we had to pump from one booster to the other booster to keep it flowing all the way to the end. Now, the interesting part of this is, again, back to the why we do what we do, and I think why it's so important for everybody. We're all taxpayers, and we charge a very, very low fee to the towns. So here, the amount of savings that we passed along, if it was done by the private sector, was about $6 million on all the projects that we did last year that would have cost, we're about 80%, 85% lower than the private sector if they did hydraulic dredging. So it's a heck of a deal for every town. Next. And the demand is there. There's a tremendous amount of demand. We do dredging for 14 out of the 15 towns. Brewster doesn't have any coastal area that requires dredging. The changes that have happened, as we're seeing now in Chatham, the Stage Harbor project has to be done every year, and it's a very, very large project. We do Pompanesett every year. We do Sassuat every year. We do Truro every year. So there's about a good 6+ harbors that have to be done every single year. Next. Just a quick little footnote. We had to raise our rates. The rates hadn't been raised since 2005. We made a very big increase from $9 to $10. And then from 13 to 14.50, so very nominal increases. Next year we'll have one more. It's still not enough to pay and to invest as we have to do. We have money that's been set aside in these reserve funds that we can access. So we have about another year or so on run rate of using that funding. Then we have to make some changes. Next. So we're guided by an advisory committee. Each town has a representative. This was up and running for many years, then it died for about 5 or 6 years, and we just restarted it again this past March. So we have all of the stakeholders involved that help us, and guide us along in terms of the scheduling and other things. Next. So this challenges. I mean, the schedule is incredibly tight. We'll talk about the windows, these restrictions that we have. It takes a lot of time. Once you set up, good, you can keep on going, but the amount of time it takes to move pipe and get everything set up and move the dredges around. We have these restrictions, time of year restrictions, and then there's always the challenge of, how much are we going to dredge, how much is available. The towns seem to overestimate, and then, we get the number and it's lower, which affects the scheduling, but sometimes it's too late because we're already committed to the project. Next slide. And this is just kind of a little, play of the puzzle here, because it is a big puzzle. When we have to go and begin a project, there's so many moving parts that have to take place. We're now getting ready to do Pleasant Bay and Chatham, up and around from the state pier, the Chatham Fish Pier, around Pleasant Bay. And, we have to move the pipe from the previous job at Mill Creek. We have to move the dredge. We have to get fuel. We have to put the booster on the beach. It's just so many moving parts. It takes a lot of time, which, again, affects the scheduling because we have to worry about the weather. This week has been blowing out of the south all week long, and we can't get the pipe off the beach, so we have to wait now till hopefully tomorrow. It looks like it's going to lay down. It'll be kind for us. The next. So what can we do? I mean, this is always a question that folks have. What can the dredges do? I mean, these are big machines. We don't really have a volume limitation. Where the Samson Island project that we did was about 43,000 cubic yards. We see some coming up that may be very, very big, in excess of 70,000 up to 100,000 for a few places that might have some projects coming up the year after next. So there's no real limit on how much we can do. It, of course, affects the schedule, because if we sit in one place and for 2 months or so, or a longer period of time, then it affects any other project that need to be done. Rocks are a problem. We did a job last year up in Bourne, Little Bay, and those are rocks that we pulled out of our rock box, which is where the sand flows in, and you hear this thing. It sounds like a big pinball machine as the rock's making its way up, and it falls in there. And, of course, the town said, oh, there's no rocks there, don't worry about it. And then we start dredging, and all of a sudden it sounds like, we got a lot of rocks moving around. So 7-inch diameter, it's a big rock. It's a pretty decent sized rock, but that's it. It can do damage, and we don't like to be playing in rocks. We can go pretty deep, 33 feet. The pumping distance, so how far can we pump the dredge from one spot to another? So the sand shifter, it can do about 6,000 feet, and then the codfish can do about 3,500. So that's a long distance. Then if we need to go further, like we said, then we put a booster in line that adds more pipe and allows us to pump a further distance. Some of the things we don't do, we're not involved in the permitting. We just show up. We're the sand distributor. All of the work has to be done ahead of time. We don't manage any of that. We do the rough grading on the beach, so all the sand gets spread out, and we don't do the final grading. We just do the rough grading. Of course, Mother Nature takes care of it. We don't manage any of the moorings. So when we do Bass River, there's a lot of moorings that need to be moved. That's all the town's responsibility. Next. Mayonnaise. It's like a very mucky, bad stuff. We don't like that. This is the sand shifter. So this is the one that we purchased in 2017. We had some problems with this prior to myself starting. It was very customized. It had a lot of very custom features done to it. And then upon delivery, it really became a problem. It had to go back to the factory to be uncustomized, and then they took it back a year or so later. It's operating quite well now. Next. The Codfish 2 is the newest of our dredges. It's a little bit smaller. This one has been operating very well, although I just got a call because we're up in Poppy and we have the stuffing box that started to leak, and now it stopped running today, and we'll have to be repacking it tomorrow. But there's always something. Next. This is the original dredge that I mentioned. Last year, we took the ladder off, which is what the big cutter head is attached to, and we made it a booster. So we kind of said, you really can't dredge anymore. It's tired, but let's see if we can get one more year out of it, which we were very, very fortunate because we did get a few big jobs out of it, the Bourne project and the Barnstable project and the Poppy project. So all of those wouldn't have been done as easily as they would have been if we didn't have this. So now we're kind of at end of life, and we're trying to figure out, okay, it's probably going to be, taken out and sold, and we'll, make some adjustments on some of the changes that we need. Next. So there's this big thing called a booster, that you have to have when I mentioned that. It sits there next to a big Caterpillar engine, so we have one of these as well. And this sits on a barge or sits on the beach, one or the other. When we do the Bass River job, it'll sit on the beach in one of the locations that the town has for us. And again, it's needed because you need to pump, long distance. Next. We got a couple of skiffs, and we got a couple of these push boats, little yard boats that we use to move the dredge from point A to point B. As you can imagine, it's not it's only about 25 feet long. So it does have, after we finish Popponesset, it needs to be all the way around Buzzards Bay, through the canal, and down to Sassuat, down to Pamet Harbor, and that'll be 2 days. Now, that's a long time, and we have to have favorable weather to do that. So these become some of those challenges that we have because the dredge is very low to the water, 1 foot chop, it'll be taking spray on, so we really have to pick our days. Next. Just quickly here, old piece of equipment that we have. Next. Another old piece of equipment that we have. Next. That one's so bad they said you need to change the chassis around. It's going to cost $25,000, and it's another one of these cases of putting more good money into bad. So the program really needs the investment, as you can see, to keep us running. So the schedule. So we have we've finished the 2 Mashpee projects, or we're almost finished with the second Mashpee project. The Provincetown project is being postponed because they have too much permitting work still to do. The Barnstable project, this is an interesting one. This is where the Barnstable Harbor, where the channel has a little dog leg. It's about 4,000 cubic yards of sand there. And the disposal area was going to be down where the cottages are at Sandy Neck. And we went down there, and the town went down there, and it turned into wetland. So now it can't be used. So they did such a beautiful job of using it when it was last done in 2018, 17. Now it's just like the bog. It rejuvenated itself, and now it's not usable. So they're going to have to be going to mechanical dredging, which will more than quadruple the cost. A bunch of projects in Falmouth, all the coastal ponds, except for the Megansett one. That'll be a new project for us. Next. And then this is for the sand shifter. So the town of Yarmouth is, their 10-year comprehensive permit is still pending approval. So we had the first project for Inglewood Channel, the second one for Pine Island Cove Channel. Those have just been postponed. And then the third one is, of course, Bass River. That is again waiting approval, so we're kind of standing by in hopes that they still will get it approved before we hit the end of year restriction. And I'll show you a couple of pieces of that in a minute. Next. Oh, let's go back for a sec, please. So the important thing here is, this is what it adds up to. So about 150,000 cubic yards, plus or minus a few, and then, about $1.7 million of revenue that we're bringing in. Next. So there's this thing called time of year restrictions, or toys, and some of the animals, if you will. We have plovers, we have horseshoe crabs, we have winter flounder. The horseshoe crabs have a lunar cycle in April and May on either side of the full moon when we can't dredge. We have to stop dredging, and those are the projects that the town of Falmouth wants to have done during that time of year, April, May. So we have to kind of stop and start and stop. Plovers, obviously we did a project in Pomponesset. We were late starting that project, and we paid a price because, the plovers started to arrive, and we had to have an observer on site, and there were 3 plovers on the beach that whole season. 3. And then winter flounder, we'll talk about that again. Next. And they love to, run on the pipe. The pipe is a nice little thing for them. It was interesting to see for the first time what happened. So the dredge season, again, the challenge is that we're not dredging 12 months out of the year. The season is very, very compressed. So we have these time of year restrictions, again, winter flounder crabs, diadromous fish, piping plovers, And these time of year restrictions are very tightly controlled. Mass Autobahn, the Heritage, the fisheries folks, and very difficult to get waivers, extensions, unless we're there dredging and we have a very short period of time left. Next. Now this is interesting. This is a new project, new to Massachusetts, but not new to the technology and being used in other areas. So the state Department of Marine Fisheries has started this project last month, 2 months ago now in August. And what they're doing is they're sampling water and filtering that water and looking for the presence of eDNA from winter flounder. So why is that important? Well, there's areas where we have restrictions in place for winter flounder, but the winter flounder haven't been seen for 20 years. But the restriction is still there. So this has got several years to go, probably 5 years, hopefully less than that, to at least prove that this can be used with the goal, obviously, of removing or lessening the restriction that we have in place for these areas where, unfortunately, winter flounder just aren't around anymore. Because that's a restriction that we have that stops us from doing the dredging. Next. And mechanical breakdowns, as I just mentioned, it happens. And we're constantly challenging with maintenance and getting ahead of the curve and doing the things that you want to do because it will break. The key is how quick can you fix it. We lose a day, we don't make it up. We can be punished by weather, we can be punished by a key piece of the equipment. We're going through a procurement process now of spending about $200,000 of operationally critical parts for the 2 dredges and our booster that aren't available off the shelf, but we need to have those in stock so when they do wear out, because they will wear out, we can replace them. Next. This is the project that I just mentioned that we just finished. This is Mill Creek. It's sort of on the border of Harwich as you go east. The channel here, this is kind of a success story apparently, where up until 2016, it was shoaling up. The back water there was all choking. There was aquaculture back there. It started to die. And we did this project twice now. The water's flowing. It fills in. It has to be done almost every year. But the water, this is an area that fills in. This whole channel up here just closes right up. So we spent... Hello? Got it? Okay. So the same thing that happened before was the channel just little by little closes up. So one of the things that's important to mention too is that almost all the work that we do is to clear channels. So navigation channels that are shoaling up because of the sand, that's the main business. Katuitt was similar, had a little bit of difference because a lot of the island section there was taken off to increase the flow. It wasn't really as a navigational concern, but almost all of the projects are navigation related. And all of the sand is always used for beach nourishment. So the sand always goes back on the beach someplace. So there's 2 benefits. 1, the channel gets cleared, and 2, the beach gets nourished. As you can see here, this is where the sand was pumped to, one of the 2 beaches to the west of Mill Creek. Next. And this is the project that's coming up next, Pleasant Bay and Chatham. That middle section there is sort of the intersection of the 3 channels. The one to the right that has the boundaries in different colors is where the dredging will take place. And there's eelgrass all around this, so the eelgrass had to be mapped first because we can't dredge near eelgrass. We have to keep a perimeter, a barrier away from that. Next. This is the projects that we're doing right now in Pompanesett. There's 2 channels, the one on the right that we just finished, and then the one that's on the diagram that kind of runs in that exact same direction that we're just halfway through that project right now. And both of these are, relatively small in terms of our volumes, 4,000, 5,000 cubic yards. Next. The Bass River. So the Bass River challenge for us is that we have had this on our schedule for the last 2 years. And last year, we unfortunately had to go to a project in Bourne because they had some scheduling problems and contractor problems. So we went to Bourne and we got a little bit hung up there. We came back here. about the second week of the January 7th or so, and January 15th is when it closed. We tried to get a waiver, we couldn't get the waiver, and now that project is now stopped because the town doesn't have the permit. But hopefully, if not this year, it'll be first on our schedule next year when they can clear the river of the moorings, and it's about 10,000 cubic yards. Plan to go on the north side of the Route 28 bridge as well. So it's a very big project that will take probably 6 weeks or so once we start, because it'll go from the approach channel all the way up north of the bridge. It'll be a very big project. To the marina. So where the marina is, out in front of the basin there. Not too much farther. And I think that there we start getting into some material that might not be good for beach nourishment. Next. So just a quick run through of some projects to sort of show you the challenges that we do face. And you know, each project is exactly the same because we're dredging sand, but each project location is entirely different because of the physical, environmental factors that we face. Next. So I mentioned Dead Neck Sand Sound. This was a really successful project for 3 years. 3 years of moving sand to 3 different locations. Next slide. And you can see this is the amount of material that we removed. The next slide. This just shows how that spit grew, and it got to that point that it needed to be trimmed back to improve the flow. So we went from the middle one, and then subsequently just kept on chopping it away, where the dredge just removed all that material. And again, all that sand was put back for habitat and for nourishment. Next. This is the stage harbor. This really is the kind of the hallmark of the projects that we've done. Like I said, 2.2 miles of pipe, 2 boosters. The area has currents, 5 knots, pretty steady 5 knots, and exceeds that when the moon came up through increased the tides. But on the right here, as you can see here, I don't know if people are familiar with that area, there's Morris Island Flats. That sand is just pouring to the west. I mean, it's really a huge problem. Over to the right, there's where the break is to the ocean, and once that break occurred, that really opened up the door for this sand to just move. This has to be done every year now, and this last year, it was supposed to be around 17,000 cubic yards. We increased it to 30,000, and we'll probably do 40,000 or more this year. And then they usually have the Army Corps come in with a hopper dredge, which means they just fill up these big basins in the dredge, and they bring it to a dumping ground and dump it. So there's no benefit other than clearing the channel. This is a recreational port, commercial port, very important. But if we didn't do it, the dredge, the hopper dredge from the Corps, wouldn't have been able to get in because it was too shoal. So we had to do it first, and they came in and cleared the rest of it out. But it's a really interesting project. Again, you can see in the top left, the locations where we did the discharge in 2 different spots that the town wanted, to really use the sand so it moves the sand back down the beach. Next. So, lessons learned on this one. We only used 1 booster last year, and it really took a toll because the one dredge that we used, the big one, the sand shifter, it was always working overtime. And the booster pump that we have was always working. We were burning tons of fuel. So this year we're going to put a second booster in line, so we'll have 2 boosters instead of just 1, which hopefully will improve the efficiency. Next. This is the project that I mentioned before with the rocks. This was kind of an interesting one because the town of Bourne gave the sand to the town of Sandwich, and they moved the sand via truck. We put it in this big dewatering pit on the beach at Monument Beach. The town had contractors that moved it across the way, and that's the bottom left. They just piled it up, let it dry out, and then a couple of 3 months later, they used dump trucks, and there you can see in the top, it was like a parade of dump trucks just going down there. And they did this on Town Beach, which, as you know, is one of the areas that's suffering with all the erosion and the houses falling down and all. Next, the rocks. So the lessons learned is we had a lot of lessons to learn in this one. We don't like rocks. We should never have gone into the area where there were rocks, which is a problem because you don't know if they haven't been done since the 50s. Nobody can remember what the material was and where they were. Next, this is the one I mentioned earlier. Pompanesett Bay. It's kind of a neat picture because it really shows, the change of the dredge as it went through and just scoured and dredged the area out. Next. It was a pretty good long pipe run. We could have done a lot more, but the permit that the town has, it can't exceed 10,000 because of the winter flounder restriction. So we could have stayed there, and we should have been done a lot more, which really requires us to come back again. But that restriction, keeps us back. Next. Sassuit, so the north side, as I mentioned, we're going to be moving the Codfish 1 over to the north side. It'll do Pamet Harbor first, then Sassuit. This was a very interesting one, and again, annually, we have to do it. A lot of sand is moving in here. It's got a choke point. The channel entrance is very narrow. A lot of sand is moving in during the wintertime with the nor'easters and easters and every direction. Next. So the problem we had here is that we did a great job. We know we took out about 10,000 cubic yards. We stopped dredging on a Friday, then we had a 3-day nor'easter. And it filled right back up again. And what we do is we have a company as a contractor that comes in and does a pre-dredge survey, and they determine how much we can take and where we can take the sand. So it's very accurate. It's not, the old days where you said, take it here. But the sand, in this case here, it just slothed right in and came right in and filled up. So unfortunately, we did a lot, but the amount of sand that just went back in again, lost our revenue, in this case, about half of it. Next. This is just a quick one of what we're doing next month, December rather, up in Pocasset. This is the Pocasset River. It's muckier stuff. It can't be put on the beach. Next slide. And we're going to be hopefully going through a process of doing something that will be very useful for other towns, where we use these geo bags and the water gets pumped into these bags along with the silt, and then you add a polymer chemical in and it separates the silt out, and then all you're left with is the material. Then they move and cut the bag open and bring the stuff to the landfill in this case. So it would be very good. It's not a hazardous material. It's just material that can't be put on a beach. So this has a lot of implications for other projects on the Cape as well. Next. Please? It could be used for the mayonnaise. The problem with the mayonnaise is that, you have a different problem of getting rid of that. But in this case here, it can be disposed of because it's not that bad. So it all depends on the degree of not bad. So this I'll close up with one of them is that, what is the cost of a navigational hazard? This job here was just 203 cubic yards. Very, very, very small. I mean, if think of us mobilizing, bringing a dredge in here, bringing all the pipe in here, all the push boats, everything that we had to do. And we finished in 3 hours. It was over with, and then break it down and done. But, it removed the shoal that was in the channel that, at low tide or any half tide, boats were hitting. So it had to be done. Next. Our website is a very good source of information. We try to keep it up. I'm a little bit behind right now on the weekly updates, but it has a lot of good information there, historical information as well. Next. That's it. So if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Ken. Really great. And we're down to our final presenter, Z. Crocker from Barnstable Clean Water Coalition. He has a solution to nitrogen that can happen tomorrow.
So hey, Rick, first of all, a hand for Rick for putting together this schedule. We packed it. There's a lot of people here tonight. Now, when he said, I want you to close out the meeting and talk about septic systems, I said, right, well, really? Is that really what we're going to do? So I'm going to go quick for you guys. We're already running late. We know that. You've really been patient. We learned a lot of stuff. Fortunately for you guys, there is not a test tonight, so you don't have to go back and try to figure out what did I learn and where am I going to go with it. So we're going to buzz through pretty quick and go through the presentation. So I'm Zenas Crocker, Barnstable Clean Water Coalition. And you know what? I grew up here. I left. I did a lot of different things in my business life. But I came back and I said, what happened? Well, how come we have ponds that are closed? How come when I swim in the water around here it's slimy? It's slimy. I can't see the bottom anymore. I used to be able to see the scup at the bottom of the dock. I used to be able to see all this. What happened and what are we going to do about it? Well, as we learned tonight, the problem is all of us. It's all of us and our contribution of nitrogen, which comes in the form of urine, which turns into ammonia. We learned the science earlier. And so we're going to buzz through what's the solution? How do we do it? What do we take care of? And we need to do it. We're all on borrowed time here. When I look around, you know, we are literally on borrowed time. We're an older audience. And you know what? It's going to take a while to solve the problem. It took a long time to actually get to this point, but we've been kicking the can down the road for a really long time, and we've got to get to the bottom of it. So at Barnstable Clean Water Coalition, we've been working on solutions, and the solutions really that we're focused on are two things. One of them, how do we deal with the groundwater that's here already? Groundwater moves 1 to 4 feet a day in Cape Cod. It's all loaded. It's all the thousands and thousands of us that have loaded the groundwater. And so we need to fix the groundwater. We also need to get to the source reduction, which is either soaring and expanding municipal treatment. And we know what's happened around here. Okay, we were hoping for solutions locally, and it's really, again, got kicked down the road. We're working on an alternative septic system technology. And here's your watershed. I'm not going to go through a lot of these slides. Let's go ahead and fast forward. Jennifer Loughran is helping me here tonight, our partner. This is the plan for the town of Barnstable for municipal treatment expansion. What's wrong with this plan? It's 30 years. Originally, when they introduced it, they said 60 years, and I said 60 years, we're all dead. That's a lousy plan. Let's get it faster than that, please. So we'll move on. Next slide. Soaring's very expensive. $100,000 to $150,000 per parcel is the cost, really almost no matter where you look. Now that's the all-in money. That's not reaching into your pocket, but it is reaching into your tax contribution, individual contribution, money that's being borrowed from the state or the federal government. We're working on alternative septic systems that cost between $20,000 and $30,000. They can be retrofit into an existing Title V system for about $20,000. Let's go to the next slide. Those are our partners. We're working with a lot of great partners here, particularly the US EPA. They're doing a lot of the testing for us. They're the proving ground for, do these systems really work? How do we show that they really work? Jennifer, let's go to the next slide. And so we're working at a little kettle pond called Schubel Pond. We chose it because we drilled, we looked for a site where we could understand groundwater and look at what was happening in the groundwater. We now have in this site, let's go to the next slide, a cluster of homes that we put in, 6 in about the last 6 weeks, and really 5 of those went in the last 10 days of these new technology systems where you can reduce nitrogen by 95% or more. There's handouts that we handed out. Excuse me, I'm going to put my water bottle down. And on it is a QR code. On the QR code, if you go to that later on, you'll be able to go and see a video. It's about 6 minutes long, and to save your time tonight, that'll really show you how these technology works. It's really a very simple technology. Let's go to the next slide. See if we have an image of that, Jennifer. So here's an image, septic tank on the right, on the left rather, and leaching field on the right, just like your regular Title V system. In the middle is a treatment tank, and the treatment tank has 2 sections to it. One has limestone in it. The limestone actually nitrifies, and as we learned from the professor earlier, you need to nitrify in order to denitrify. And the second section has wood chips in it. The wood chips provide a carbon source and in an anoxic environment, and we also learned about that tonight. And the lack of oxygen, a certain kind of bacteria that actually respirate nitrogen, they turn it back into gas, and we're breathing it. 80% of the atmosphere is gas. It's harmless. So that's the way the system works. What we like about this system, and there's other systems, but they don't work as well, is that it's resilient, it's low maintenance, very low maintenance. We monitor in real time, very cost competitive, as I just said, versus sewering. And the absence of power, and this is critical, it actually will continue to operate as a Title V system. The only working part is an air pump. And so the air pump actually recirculates the water. In the absence of power, that doesn't work, but you continue to have it operate as a regular Title V system. That's important. We all have storms here. We all know that. So this is the performance data that we're seeing. The brown bars are actually how much nitrogen is going in to the septic tanks. And so we can see that they're very, very high numbers, and they're very variable numbers. So depending on what you eat, depending on what the conditions are in your household, how many people, can be different for your contribution of nutrients and nitrogen going into your septic tank. The pink bars there are what's coming out with this system, and you can see that we're averaging 6.7 to 8.7 milligrams. We're getting toward 5 milligrams. Now, how does that compare? So the treatment plant in the town of Barnstable gets about 6, 7, 8. So we're already at numbers that are equal to or better than a municipal treatment system at a far lower price. We need to prove this technology out. It's still going to take a couple of years to get full certification from Mass DEP, but we're working with boards of health like Barnstable, and we're working across the whole Cape area. And so we're hoping that we'll see these systems piloted here as well and put in around the Bass River area, because in my mind, it's really the only solution that we're going to see in the near term to actually reduce the nutrient load that's causing the problem here in the estuary, here in Bass River. And what's the gold standard? The gold standard, yes, we've got sentinel stations, but when do we see eelgrass come back, right? When do we see health return to our estuaries? And we don't know what that is, but we know that we better start dialing down everything that we're putting into the ground. We live on a sandbar, right? There are about 5 aquifers here on Cape Cod. So I'm worried not only about our estuaries, I'm worried about our fresh water for drinking, I'm worried about our ponds. We're loading up our systems with nutrients, and with climate change, we're turning up the heat. So it's not hard to figure out what happens. Turn up the heat, you add nutrients, bad things happen. So we'll look at the next slide, please. We're also working in cranberry bogs, so Alex Hackman was great. One of the things that we're working on here, we're lucky in that this particular cranberry bog system is at the headwaters of the Marston's Mills River. It looks like you've got a bog system that's also importantly in an area where transitioned over to wetland conditions. Really think just like what they're trying to do in the Everglades, it can actually reduce nutrients at a tremendously low cost. So for municipal treatment, you can think this way, costs about $1,000 to $1,500 a kilogram to remove nitrogen. The same nitrogen we're bringing over the bridge, by the way, to fertilize our lawns. So for a restoration project like this, we think it may be as little as $10 a kilogram to actually remove the nutrients. So I view restoration projects like this as being critical to buy us time so we can put in new alternative septic systems where we can, and also expand sewering. That's important. So in high density areas, we need municipal treatment. There's no doubt about it. And with that, I'll really wrap up relatively quickly. We're only about an hour behind schedule, but thank you, Rick. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for having me. We're all in this together.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Z. It's wonderful to see all of you this afternoon. What a beautiful spot this is to have this. I want to thank all our presenters, and in particular, I was thinking as I was sitting in the back, how we've been in existence for 4 years, and how did we get from nothing to where we are now? And so I want to extend my very special thanks to a gentleman who's been with us. It'll be 2 years in February. Without him, we wouldn't be where we are today. Rick Bishop, he's done an extraordinary job. Absolutely over-the-top extraordinary. So I heard, I think it was our dredge presenter, I heard a comment how they were running lean and mean. Well, I'll tell you what lean and mean is. We've gotten to this point with 1 paid staff member and 1 part-time grant writer assistant. So, and a lot of volunteer work and a lot of hard work on the part of a lot of other people. But there are 2 items I'm going to cut right to the chase. I'm going to ask you to help us with. Rick needs a paid assistant, and we need an office. Our offices have been in Rick's living room since the beginning, and his wife wants her living room back. And so we've identified a spot that's a great, perfect location. It's got the minimum of square footage that we need. And if you could help us financially to get those 2 items, we would be eternally grateful, and we would be able to advance our initiatives at the rate they should be getting advanced. So basically, please help us to help our river be the best it can be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I really appreciate your commitment to what we're trying to achieve here. And keep your eyes open. This event is going to be put up on a YouTube channel, so you get to see yourself on TV coming in a few weeks. But thanks again for coming.